So now we should be live, I think, I hope. Yes, yes we are. Oh my God, I'm so sorry guys. So now we should be live, I think, I hope. Okay, we are live. So I'm sorry that it took us so long. I had technical difficulties to start the live streaming. Thank you, Daniel Vetter from Gentle Gaming, for being here. Thank you, Kevin, for being our guest of honor tonight, that you took time to talk to us and show us something of your craftsmanship. My name is Dirk Ehlen. I am a librarian here at the Central Public Library of Düsseldorf. We try to give gaming a place to meet, to greet, and to just exist here, to talk to people with this special interest. Yeah, this live streaming, we started it at the peak of the pandemic, I think, last year in November. You can check out the streaming at the YouTube channel of Gentle Gamer, and we took also another masterclass. The first one was with David, I think, was it? Yes. Yeah, you can. I put it in the chat. I'm a little bit off the rails right now. What I wanted to say is thank you that you took your time. I will stop talking about our library in a minute. I will just want to show you a trailer of what you can expect if it happens to be that you are in Düsseldorf and you come to us. After that, Kevin will take a turn and make the evenings as great as, yeah, I think. So you saw that we can give you a lot of space to meet and greet people here at the Central Library in Düsseldorf. So Kevin, I will just start your presentation, yes?
Hello. Are we live? Are we loud and clear? Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, it's good.
Great. So, yeah, I'll begin. Thanks for joining us, everybody. This is a slideshow. I'm just going to quickly run through what my career has involved and how the changing genres and generations of different consoles has affected the graphics that I've been producing throughout the ages. And it's been quite a long time. I started my journey as a junior artist a long time ago in the late 80s. Moved on to become head of graphics, eventually graphics director, and now I'm just classed as an old artist. So I'll just get on with the show. So in the late 80s, really I was quite a fan of nature and David Attenborough, and I'd watch a lot of TV programs and big fan of dinosaurs and monsters, and so I'd spend a lot of my time painting and stuff in my bedroom. In the 80s, video games arrived, which completely distracted me from the whole back garden wildlife thing. And so once I discovered my handheld games and my Atari, that was the new thing, and it was kind of difficult to get me back outside again. And then in the late and mid 80s, I guess, I started messing around with home computers such as a ZX Spectrum, ZX81 and Acorn Electron, and just typing in software myself to sort of familiarize myself with BASIC programming language, which was what we used at the time, and it was my main source of getting video games for my very early ZX81. And in the late 80s, I knew I wanted to be in the video game industry, but there wasn't really an industry as such, an established industry. So careers officers tend to try to persuade me not to venture that path and become more of a traditional artist or do something entirely different. But I was very, very lucky to have just come across an advertisement in my local newspaper for a company which was actually looking for video game artists. And I managed to get an interview there. And this is Rare. It all began. If you see what I did there, it was actually Rare Limited. And I'd never heard of the company. And until I actually walked into this old farmhouse, the managing director of the company, Tim Stamper, greeted me, and he showed me all of this hand airbrushed artwork, which was on a great big rack. And it was astonished because it was all of the artwork to the video games that I'd been playing on my brother's ZX Spectrum for years, and it was kind of like meeting my heroes. And my jaw dropped, and they showed me around the place, and yeah, they asked me if it was something that I thought I could do, and I was just so blown away by the place. I said yes, even though I didn't think that I actually could, because I'd got no experience with it. And they asked me to start the following week, and so that's what I did. And it was, as I said, happiness from day one, because originally they put me on some very basic projects for some of the early games on the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, which was a console which I'd not even heard of, and it wasn't so popular in the UK. But Tim and Chris were actually venturing into that ballpark. They'd already written a couple of games for it. And when I actually saw what it could actually do compared to the software that I was used to using on my home computer, I was quite excited about doing that. And so Tim showed me the ropes and how to put graphics together, and began sort of producing very basic graphics for games like Wheel of Fortune and Conversion, things like John Elway's Quarterback, and a lot of different video games which were versions of TV shows which were very, very popular in the United States. And then as time went on, the games became more film orientated, and we were doing things like Roger Rabbit and Nightmare on Elm Street and Beetlejuice. And it was at that point that Rare had grown a little bit, and we wanted to sort of come up with our own mascot and our own IP, which we could create an identity for. So I was given the task then of creating a set of characters which would just fit a video game. There wasn't really any brief other than just to say, set of characters. We need something that we can use for a video game that belongs to us. And so as I'd obviously spent so much time in my back garden, I was quite keen on using the idea of the animals that I used to paint and draw and so the first thing I did was come up with some characters called what I called the amphibians, which was a collection of frogs and toads and newts from my back garden. And I just gave them sort of superpowers and drew them all on a lily pad. And we had a look at the whole design and said, well, we don't like the name, but we'll work on that and we'll develop that. And so I was given the task of developing the graphics on those characters and coming up with all of the enemies and all of the different supporting characters of the game, and putting together a Bible, if you like a style guide, because that was what we were always receiving when we were producing the video games for the likes of Beetlejuice and any other franchise that was given to us by somebody else. So that was my and once we started to begin putting graphics together at Rare at the time, we'd not embraced the digital age, and everything was done very traditionally on paper. Everything was hand drawn. I don't know if you can see there on the slide. I don't know if, is that clear enough, Daniel? Can you see that? Is that good? I don't know if you can see my cursor on here. If there's anything moving around, just let me know. That's great. So yeah, we've got an image there which I would draw, and look, you'll see there's a generic character, which is one of my new characters for a side project I'm doing there, but it's a good way to illustrate what we used to do. And so we draw a floor line, and we draw this character, and we'd have to draw several frames, maybe 2 or 3 run frames. No animation skills other than what I learned myself or what Tim told me, and just sort of put together 3 frames to create a run. And then you would put that under some graph paper and make sure that it was all taped down and secure. And then the next job would be to sort of pixelate that by hand, by drawing around the image with a pencil and trying to make sure that you got the contours of the shape, and you'd got sort of a very low resolution silhouette of that character. And then the next step would be to take some felt pens, which we managed to get some very thick sort of magic marker style pens, which were just the same thickness as the pixels which were on the graph paper. And we would color them in the colors that we were allowed to use for the Nintendo, and it was often 3 shades of any particular color, like 3 shades of red, blue, or whatever. And if you wanted to add any extra detail, you'd have to overlay more colors, and there was a special way of doing that. There was no undo, because it was a totally traditional organic way of working, and so if you made a mistake, you couldn't rub out the felt pen. You had to take a surgical scalpel and actually literally just scrape that off the page, and quite often that usually resulted in a page that looked something like this, and I'd end up cutting my fingers and making lots of mistakes. And this was basically perhaps not quite as bad as this most of the time, but mistakes were made quite often. And the only way you could really visualize what you were looking at was to walk away from your desk and sort of screw your eyes up at it to kind of simulate the CRT screen, or a television screen, if you like, so that you got a kind of blurry image and you could imagine how it was going to look. But the next phase was to actually take that data, and you had to split it up into lots of small 8x8 boxes called sprites. And there was a special method used to calculate all of this pixelation inside each box, to then create an image for each one of these boxes. And then you would position all of those boxes, and I'll just come back to that slide again. If you would position all those boxes and have to work out where these sprites were in relation to one another, and you would then sort of save it onto a floppy disk and take that upstairs to the software engineer, and the software engineer would take a look at it, and we'd put it into the game. And quite often, as I say, there was mistakes made, and so you'd have to go back downstairs and do it again and save it onto disk. But that was my first introduction to doing video game graphics. And then we moved on to the next step a few years later. And it was something we had to do, because once we moved from the 8-bit genre to the 16-bit sort of generation of consoles, when the Super Nintendo came along, we were no longer using 3 colors. We'd had to use sort of 15 colors and a transparent color. So we got a much more colorful, much more detailed, and a lot more data. And the only way to really do that was to have a digital art package to create that art, because it would have taken you forever to try and work out all of the data. Plus, we needed more frames of animation then, because things had progressed, and so that it was really not feasible to do it on paper anymore. So Chris Stamper had actually been working on a piece of hardware which was sort of called the RAS board, and that was our flagship sort of piece of hardware we were going to produce arcade machines on. And we hadn't actually used it for an arcade machine at that point, and so the idea was that we could utilize that hardware and connect it up to a very early Wacom. I've got one of these Wacom pens here, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and you can draw remotely on a tablet. These had a long cable, and they connected onto that that tablet, and so I could actually, for once, draw my images directly onto the screen, and I didn't have to work any data out or anything like that. And when I made a mistake, rather than scratching it out and cutting my fingers off, I could actually press undo, and I think I could undo things about 8 times. But the method that we actually used around that time, we were very fortunate because there was the new invention, the camcorder sort of came along, and they were a lot more affordable than the old great big video recorders that you used to have to use if you wanted to film anything. And with these camcorders, we were able to sort of digitize on a tripod. We could actually put our camera above our image that we'd drawn on paper. So we were still drawing it on paper first, take a snapshot of that image and feed that into the editor, which I could then use, and then I could start pixelating it and cleaning it up and skipping through different frames of animation to see how they looked. So it was a big departure from our original method, and it was a lot more fun to work on. But it was quite good still, because we'd still got that mixture of organic traditional method and the digital method. So, and then the next step in computer graphics for us was when we moved from this digital age to a 3D rendered digital age, if you like. I think Tim Stamper had got some brochures on his desk, which he was looking at. He was always thinking about the future of the company and how we could make things better. And one of the things he'd got was some brochures that showed the kind of software which only car manufacturers would really use, just computer-aided design packages, or maybe aircraft engineers would use. And they were often used to produce TV commercials. And so if you saw a tin of paint or a bottle of shampoo moving on the screen like a real person or something like that, it was often CG, and that's how they would do it. And so it all looked pretty amazing, but I couldn't see how that was going to translate onto a Super Nintendo and how we were going to use that. So Tim actually gave me a machine to experiment on. And because I was quite heavily into martial arts when I was a kid, the first thing I did was try to build some kind of martial artist, because it was always my wish to work on a fighting game. And I built a very, very crude looking model and sort of tested that out, and I made it move towards the camera, and it looked great, but it wasn't anything that you could actually use for a video game. It was just a little bit more cinematic. But around about that point, I was also working on the Battletoads arcade machine. And so we'd gone from the NES to the Super Nintendo, and we'd done Game Boy versions of the original game. But we were actually also working on a kind of scrolling beaten up version of the game, which was for the arcade, using that RAS board hardware. And I did a few tests with that, and I rendered up a couple of things like the spaceship, which on one of the levels was on a sort of horizontal shooting level. And this spaceship was sort of rock, and I sort of rendered a frame of the ship from the side like this, and I just sort of tilted it, and then I tilted it this way, so 15 frames of animation. And then as it was moving along, if you can see on this ship, it was sort of rocking like that, and it only had a very, very low amount of colors. But as soon as it was moving, your mind filled in all of the gaps, and it actually quite solid. And so it worked. And then I did a couple more tests. And I rendered out, I think it was like a large steel cannonball or something like that. And I put a checker pattern on it so that I could render the checker pattern moving sort of 90 degrees so that it would rotate and give the illusion of the ball actually rotating. And we were able to scale those sprites, which was a characteristic of RAS board. And when we combined the scaling with the animation, made these balls look like they were coming towards the camera at the end of the game. So that all worked pretty well, and so we sort of took that from there, and we went on to start creating a fully rendered game. And as I said, I was very into fighting games when I was a kid, and so I wanted to make my own fighting game. And one of the best features of the software that we'd got, it had got a lot of what they called natural phenomena, which would be fire or liquids or ice. And so it was a bit of a no-brainer, really, to try and build a character made from fire or a character made from ice or water. And I think around about that time, we'd got the movie Terminator 2, which was very popular, and Jurassic Park. And so video games, TV and movies were looking a lot more CGI rendered. And so video games were only going to be a matter of time before they took that path. So I started experimenting with some of those characters and trying to make something that looked a little bit more organic.
Fuck.
I just had to chuckle when you said that you had to do everything by hand and draw everything, because I have this.
We are live again.
Yeah, we are.
Can you wiggle your hand a little bit so I can see that we are? Yes, with the delay, we are live.
We're live again. Yes.
Again.
Okay. Okay, so I think we had a bit of a technical hitch there. I don't know what happened, but everybody sort of disappeared. But I'm going to continue just talking about the more organic looking characters. Once we'd got these primitive shapes progressed into this more organic looking, so we've gone from something that looked like a robot and a toy to something that looked a lot more realistic. But Nintendo actually came over to see what we were doing with this technology, and they wanted to put one of their characters into that sort of style so that they could push the Super Nintendo a little bit further. And I think they came over, and I think they actually wanted something to compete with the likes of the Mega Drive's Aladdin, which was a beautiful looking game. And it was all hand animated by Disney animators, but this new rendering technology hadn't really been seen before. And so we'd proven that we could actually get these characters to look solid. And so Nintendo then supplied us with a lot of machinery so that we could recreate the Donkey Kong character. And I'm not sure whether the feed cut off before I was explaining this, but fortunately, I was really lucky to have got the opportunity to redesign Shigeru Miyamoto's Donkey Kong character. And so I made a much more compact looking version of it, because I was making something which I was envisioning going in a very sort of NES style platform game. But once you move the camera around, things started to look very different. And so, as you can see there, his shape changed quite a lot from my original concept design. But when that was on a small resolution, it all looked very compact. And once the light started moving and the shadows started moving as the character moved around, it all looked very solid. And so, as I say, we got supplied by Nintendo lots and lots of machinery so that we could render up this whole game. And I think we did a pretty good job of making people think that they were actually using hardware which was either enhanced or from a different machine, because the overall look of Donkey Kong Country, it was like nothing I had seen before at the time. So then the next step was to go from rendered graphics to real 3D, and this was something of a step back for me, because I'd got so spoiled with having curves and as much as I wanted and rendering them down into a little picture and then turning that little picture into a sprite, that now we were faced with more limitations in some ways, because we were now moving around an environment and the computer had to generate everything. So it took a lot more processing power and a lot more graphics power. And so things had to be a lot cheaper. And I think Nintendo demonstrated what could have been done with it wonderfully with Mario 64. And so after looking at that, we decided we were going to make a racing game. But because we'd now got this environment that you could explore, which wasn't limited to a 2D scrolling racetrack as you would have seen on Mario Kart, we were able to explore a whole world. And so we tried to take Diddy Kong Racing into a different dimension, if you like, and add an adventure element to that. But the graphics themselves are a lot cruder than what I was using when I was creating the sprites, because the texture resolution was much lower, and so that meant that it was better to actually put less detail on your characters and just have flat colors. And so that meant that Diddy Kong Racing was going to look a very colorful, bright game, but the whole concept, I think, came together very well because of that sort of limitation of the system. And as you can see there, the game was originally called Pro-Am 64, which was a sort of nod to one of the earlier games that Rare had produced. But it was a great game to work on. It was probably the most fun I had at the company. So then we moved on, excuse me, to a much more advanced system when we started working on things like the GameCube. The graphics there were far more advanced because you could actually add additional bump details. I don't know whether you can see it very well on this slide, but one of the characters here, and in particular most of the dinosaurs, they'd actually got additional information to show a texture on the character, which if the light moved around, the definition would change, and that was called a bump map. And so on GameCube, we were actually utilizing reflection maps and bump maps and a lot of what they call physical based shader attributes to create sort of realistic looking materials. And so we were able to utilize that and also generate particles to create things like fur. This is a very early render of the crystal character that I did, which was actually created in the Maya software, but even the GameCube was capable of creating particles, and so they'd looked a little bit cruder than this, but it was just another step in the advancement of video game graphics. Also, we'd got a lot better audio. We could pull audio tracks from CD now, and so this meant that the games themselves just became a lot more cinematic, if you like, and so we were able to have a dialogue for the character and cutscenes, and so the whole thing was a way more exciting experience than it was on the N64 because we got these great big cinematic sequences. And then I took a break from the industry for a while, and I actually pursued a music career for a little while and did graphics of my own for just generic sort of graphics for different companies. But in 2015, I was asked very kindly by a team of people that used to work at Rare if I wanted to join them to create a game called Yooka-Laylee, which was known as a spiritual successor to one of the games that Rare produced called Banjo-Kazooie. And it was, for me, it was, I always say this, but it was kind of like I'd closed my eyes for about 7 or 8 years and opened them again, and all of the things that I'd wished for back in the early 2000s, 40s, was to have pre-rendered graphics, but the quality of pre-rendered graphics, but on a 3D character in a 3D environment. And that's what we were getting now, because we were getting full self-shadowing and all of the reflections and all of the particles that we used to render up, but it was actually happening in real time. So that was the first game I worked on with Playtonic Games. And then we followed that up with another game, Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, and we took that to another level by adding a sort of overworld level. And so it was a bit of a nod to a couple of different genres from the past, but it was just sort of put in a new sort of swing on that, if you like. So, and also Playtonic Games are also a publishing house now, so we're actually publishing video games for a lot of other different small developers, and so we've done about 6 or 7 now. If you check out Playtonic's site, you can see more of those and you can find out more about those games on the site. So creating graphics now basically starts off with the concept art, because there's a lot more people on the teams now, and it's not just myself working with a piece of paper and then just putting it into a video game from a disc, or just saving it directly into the game and taking it to one programmer. There are a lot of people working on a project, and so we have to make sure that everything that goes into that game has been sort of addressed, and we've brought forwards any issues that may come up with it. We have to sort of really plan what the character's going to do, and so that means that we do need to have a little bit more planning than we used to do back when we were using pixel graphics. So this is a quick concept for one of the characters that was actually seen in the first ukulele game. And there's some concepts here of one of the corporate minions that sort of tracks around in the casino level. I think the end model that we used, I don't know if you can see my cursor again, but I'm sort of circling this little black one here. They were moving around on the level, and so that was the kind of direction I went with it. And this was the idea for one of the baddies, and you can see that he got suction cups for feet there, but in the final game he was actually moving around on a railway track in the casino level, and he had wheels kind of like a roller coaster car. So when I built the model, first of all, it means that you've got to build yourself a polygonal model, a very low polygon model, and you can just quickly see there that's what my final model looked like. But the process involved making a very low sort of faceted, low poly count version of that model here, and then perhaps bringing it into another piece of software which I like to use called ZBrush, to then sculpt in a lot more definition, which you can see there. You can see that these polygonal faceted areas have been smoothed out there and rounded off, and you've got a lot more extra detail, and it looks a little bit more sort of organic and believable. But then that information that I take from ZBrush is then projected onto this lower model, so it's a little bit more manageable for the computer. And that means you have to create yourself a texture map, which is then applied to each of these faces on the model with what's called a UV map. So if you like, we're kind of unfolding the whole set of geometry here and making a map, which then has a coordinate. Each one of these little dots on the lines here would have a coordinate which is relative to the same point on the model. And so then the computer is able to map a texture to each of these faces to create a more believable shape. So here you can see there's an actual map which dictates how the lines fall on the shape, and this is called an ambient occlusion map. So wherever light reaches, it's white, and where there's more shadow, there's a lot of darker areas. So it just helps give the model a much more solid look. And then you can see there on the back of the head of the character, there was just some simple detail to make like a fluorescent logo. It said Inept 2000 there, which was on the back of the head. And that's just a demonstration of how the textures are actually projected onto the characters. Then you need to take it stage and thread a skeleton through that whole model if you want to start posing it and allowing it to move in the game. And each one of these bones here that I've put through, it's kind of like an armature, and each color here represents the power of how every joint influences the geometry below it. So it's kind of grouped up into different values. So if I rotate this joint here at the start of the tail, the whole nest of tail joints will move, and so it forms a chain. And so then you can begin posing it and animating it. And then once you've got that skeleton in, I would give that then to a guy who is much better than I am at animating, and he would put what's called a rig in it so that he can control that arm in a much more organic way and get way better animations than I would have done back in the day when I was working on Donkey Kong Country. So we've got a lot more tools now, and we've also got a lot more people that are way more specialized in each particular area. But it's still great fun to work on because I still get to do a bit of concept art, and I still get to do the texturing and all the things that I actually quite enjoy, creating the different maps and sculpting the detail in. And you can see there, this was the basic model sketch, which then translated into a 3D model sort of low poly one. And once you've got the extra detail on it, you can just see how the light hits that in a different way according to how the map, which dictates the normals on the surface. And so it sort of behaves in a different way according to those maps. And these are some of the examples of the characters. Once you've got the different attributes sewn together and you've got somebody clever in software to make it actually run around in the game, this is what we end up with after we've built our models and textured and put rigs in them. And it's obviously it's very different to the original pixel art which I was doing, where I was cutting my fingers, but that's pretty much how we do it now. And even since I've started working at Playtonic, the hardware has changed and the consoles have got a lot more powerful. And so now we're even looking at changing things again. So, I mean, it's going down the route where things don't need so much in the way of textures anymore, because the computer can handle a much higher geometry count. And so we're getting a lot more definition without using textures, but it's just the way everything's going. We always knew that eventually you'd have a fully contoured, detailed model once the machines got hard enough. And we're actually at that stage now where I think it's very difficult to tell what's a CG and what's actually reality. So it's been a great journey because I've been able to see it from this very basic age, from first looking at handheld video games and then actually being able to step into the industry and mess around with pixels on paper and then with video camcorders, and then to experiment with 3D software to finally reach this stage where things are looking realistic. In my spare time, I've got a project which I'm working on with David Wise. He's a musician that was very famous for a lot of the video games that he's worked on, such as Donkey Kong Country, and he also worked on ukulele and a lot of other. But we've put together a project which is a bit of a nod to the games that we worked on in the past, and we've called that SALAMANDOS. And we've set up ourselves a comic and a YouTube station, and what we're trying to do there is sort of incorporate tutorials and show the development of a typical video game character and how it's put together, and just have a bit of fun with it along the way and make a comic and perhaps a music performance and sort of bring everyone together. So yeah, we've got a comic, features concept art. It shows you how we put the models together, and I could quickly show a spin of one of the models. And this has been created in exactly the same way as I was just explaining there. It's just hasn't got any textures on, so you can see all the detail that's projected onto the map. But this is basically what we do, and it's a fun process to be involved in. And I'm really glad that I've got the job in the industry that I've got. So if you want to check out our Twitch station and our YouTube channel, you can see a lot more. Dave's giving some advice on music production, and I'm giving some advice on how to put graphics together. But this is how we've been doing it for the last 30 years, and so we've got a bit of a mixed set of experiences that we can sort of pass over. And so if you want to check those out, I'll put a link to those in the chat at the end. And finally, I think I'll give a little bit of basic career advice if we've got time. I don't know if we've got time since we had a little bit of a delay. Yeah, are we good? Okay, so
we have as much time as you like.
That's good. So I think I'll just read these directly. So when you are actually looking to get into the industry, just know what kind of game it is that you want to produce, what kind of style it is you want to produce graphics for, and what you feel most comfortable with. Don't try and do something that you're not comfortable with, because you'll be better at, obviously, the stuff that you enjoy doing. So also make use of all of the available resources that are there. You've got a lot of free software, such as Blender, which is an amazing 3D piece of software that you can download, and also familiarize yourself with software like Unity, which is a game engine which you can use to actually put those graphics into an environment which would be very similar to how the game is put together. Because once you start working at a video game company, if you're lucky enough to get in, you will need to know basics of how the game is put together and how your assets are going to perform, and going to be entered into the system. And so you need to look at engines such as Unity and Unreal. But have a play with that. I mean, you can usually download sort of free trial versions, and I think with Unity, I think you can use it for free anyway. Showcase your work on social media, ArtStation, you know what they are. There's plenty of them, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing it already. But even try and get some of your models, get some of your assets on Sketchfab and CubeBrush, because you might even earn a little bit of money from that. And once you've actually sold a model, then you're a professional artist. So it's a great way to build your confidence up. If you can work with like-minded people on teams, you are working on a team if you work in the game industry, and those teams vary from a couple of people with a small indie crew or a huge company, but you do need to get used to working with other people. So it's good to try and find people that also want to work on a project with you, and you can usually find those on social media or the various forums that are out there. And if you're involved with the Unity training programs, I think you can probably find a lot of people that are also looking for people to work on their projects. Only show your best work. Don't just keep piling work out, because when people are looking at work, when they're interviewing people to work, whether it's as a software engineer or a graphics engineer, whatever, only put your best stuff, because it quite often too much is much, less is more, if you like. I think people remember that one piece of artwork far more several pieces of average work. And if you want your stuff to really stand out, just send a few pieces, and if the people that are looking for a new artist really want to get in touch with you, they'll get in touch with you and ask to see graphics. So just concentrate on quality rather than quantity. Don't wait for the company to be hiring. Don't keep bombarding them with emails on social media, but just keep looking on their site and see if they are interested at all, and keep posting your stuff on social media, and hopefully they'll pick it up. Also, go through the right channels. Don't keep texting and messaging people just because you've got their contact details. Go through LinkedIn or go through their website, go through all the correct channels, and send the appropriate work. If it's a game that does cartoony style games that you want to work on, then only send cartoony stuff. Don't send hyper realistic stuff to a company that is famous for creating a game like Mario World. I would also say learn new skills. If you've got time, you might enjoy some of them. There's a lot of different disciplines in the industry. You need to learn animation or modeling or concept art. You could possibly even learn UI graphics and promotional materials. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And every time you learn something new, it makes you a little bit more desirable to a company, in particular to a smaller company, because they don't have the budget to spend on a lot of different stuff. And so if you can do more than one thing, that makes you way more attractive as an applicant. So, and when you have actually finally made it into the job of your dreams, try and improve, which you will do over time anyway, but also learn newer skills, because since I've got my job at Playtonic, there has been a lot of holes in my skill set, and I've had to learn a lot of new technology and a lot of new software. And so over the last 5 or 6 years that I've actually been there, I've learned a lot more stuff. And also I've tried to be as versatile as I can and get involved in other areas like the UI and stuff like that. And don't stress if you don't get into the company of your dreams. Just keep trying, because there's a lot of people trying to get into that industry. And just because you didn't get through that one time when you sent your stuff, send it again, because we had a number of people. I remember when I used to interview people at Rare, and I used to look through all of the pages and pages of sometimes you'd see an applicant come back again a few years later, and they'd improved, or they'd taken a different approach, or they'd started doing environments rather than characters perhaps, and then they got the job. So try your hand at different things and just don't give up. So and that's it really. I think I'll just say good luck, and sorry if I've rushed it a little bit too much there at the end. I just tried to wrap it up a little bit quicker so that we can get some questions in, because I know we had a few technical difficulties. So hope that was clear. Is that okay? If there's any questions, then fire ahead.
That was perfect. Just for Daniel and you, Kevin, I will set up the page where we can see you two once more. So don't sweat it if there is no video yet. You can just start, and I will put you in a second.
Okay.
Alrighty then. This is the moment where the audience can ask questions to you, Kev. And during your presentation, they were already coming in, and I would just read them to you. The first one is from Fossi. I apologize right at the beginning if I mispronounce any names. I'm sorry. Fossi says, how often did the rest of the team disagree with your ideas, names, designs, etc.? And what change was the hardest for you to accept?
I tell you what, it would be also quite good if I can see the question so I can also refer to it. Is there a way to chat up there? But I think there's always going to be some disagreements with the development of a character, but that's the whole point in us doing the concept art first, so we can agree upon a design. And quite often characters will change during the design process because maybe the actual design of the game is different, or they've maybe decided to add a different move to a character, which means you might have to rethink that design. It's sometimes a good idea to have a basic character, almost like a mannequin in the game to begin with, so that you're not worrying too much about what a character looks like. At the early stages, you'll be designing the game, and so the aesthetics of the character doesn't really come into it at that stage. What was the second part of the question, Dan?
Yeah, the second, well, it was basically just how often you guys disagree with each other, and what was the change for you, or was there a change that was the hardest for you to accept?
Well, as I think I've covered the first part with the disagreement, because it does happen. It always happens throughout development, but not in a bad way. It always means that everything goes through a development process. But the hardest thing for me to adjust to was probably going from the rendered sprites from games like Killer Instinct and Donkey Kong to the N64, because when I look at it now, it was a very limited console compared with what we've got today. And so I think texture sizes and poly counts, I think we had to make lots of different versions of a character. For instance, in Diddy Kong Racing, we had the cars with the characters in, but you had to build that model and then reduce the polygons and then reduce the polygons again. And so every time the character got further away from the screen, it didn't draw as much detail, and that's called a LOD, which is a level of detail model. And so it was quite involving, and there was a lot of work to do to just get that console to run at a decent frame rate.
Right. Okay. The next question is from Nicholas McConnell. He asks, how did you learn all these tools through the years? Was it self-taught? He presumes much of it is highly technical.
I think once you've learned the basic fundamentals of it, a polygon is a polygon, and I actually explained some of this in some of my tutorials, which I've put on YouTube. And again, I'll put the link to that if you like graphics for beginners, if you're completely new to the whole 3D thing, which is what I've tried to cover in this. It all starts off with a dot, and you join 3 dots together and it makes a triangle. And then you join those triangles together to make a 3D shape, and that's all it is. But the software, some of the software is a little bit different used to other pieces of software, but I've used the same piece of software for a long time, and so I'm very familiar with the way it works. But it's not difficult to pick up, certainly not difficult nowadays, because you've got the likes of YouTube and plenty of online assistance, and you can ask any question, type it onto your keyboard, and somebody will have an answer for that. Whereas 20 years ago or so, we had a huge pile of manuals, and we didn't do any courses or anything. We just had the manuals, and if you wanted to know how to do something, you had to find out yourself. But fortunately, because there were so many others using the software at Rare, we could help each other, and we kind of learned the whole process together. But different people had learned different techniques too, so there isn't just one way of doing things. You can do things in a number of different ways, but I would urge you to check out some of the videos of software like Blender and take a look at that if you want to get into 3D graphics.
Oh, speaking of Blender, Frauke K asked a question about Blender. Is Blender up to par in a professional setting, or should you start with Maya/ZBrush as early as possible?
Having never used Blender, other than maybe for 5 minutes to try it out, I was impressed with it, and I know that companies are using it to create video games. So yes, certainly it's capable of producing graphics for video games. I think now all of the 3D software is kind of on a par with each other. There's no big difference between one piece of software and another. They're all very capable. It's just a question of which one you can afford to use and which one you find easiest to use. But just check out the different videos, maybe download a trial version if you can, but just take a look at what's on YouTube and see what's been done with what piece of software. And maybe you can make a decision after looking at what you've seen online.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is again by Fossey. How automated is making that texture map? It looks like it's such an involved process.
It all depends on how detailed your model is or what kind of style your game is. If you're doing a game which is like Diddy Kong Racing, or for instance something the same style as Fall Guys or Mario, then it's a very colorful, cartoony looking game. So there's usually very little texture information. It's just flat colors, and the geometry does all the work. So you now can have a lot more tiny triangles to that polygonal mesh, and so you can have a lot more definition, which isn't relying on a texture map to create that definition. And what tends to happen now is you'll have a much higher res model with less texture information but more material information, if you like. So rather than having a rock, if I was building a rock in a game and I wanted it to look like it was all jagged and cracked, rather than having a texture applied to it now with a crack texture, you would actually have the luxury of building that crack into the actual surface of the geometry, because the machines are so much more powerful now than they used to be. And then you can just apply a global rock color or rock shader with the characteristics of a rock material to it. So it's changing all the time, and as the technology changes, what we have to do to create the models becomes more specialized, but in some ways it becomes simpler as well. So I hope that answers your question.
If not, please type in the chat. The next question is by Spielverstand. How do you come up with new character ideas? Where do you draw your inspiration? Or is it the basic design idea determined by the project's pitch?
It's a lot easier to come up with a character when there's a design pitch. The Salamandos were a nod to the Battletoads, because a long time ago I created those guys, and they've been rebooted now and they look wonderful now. And I guess my characters are a little bit more retro looking and a little bit closer to the originals, but it was very easy for me to create those because I was almost recreating something that I'd done a long time ago. But if I was to create a new character now, it would always be based on a brief. You don't just create a character and put it into the game. There's a lot of design talk and a lot of meetings to say how a level's going to work, and so you've got to make sure that you tick all of the boxes with the design. And it's very much a team decision now rather than one person's decision. I've got the luxury of making what characters I want with Dave Wise on the Salamandos project, because there isn't a game at the moment. I'm just making characters. So, but when you're making a game, it's harder in some ways because you've got to make sure you meet with the criteria, but also that at least allows you to focus on those areas and create a character based on that design. I hope that helps.
Pretty sure it will. Vegard Lindland asks, do you feel like the way you yourself come up with a design has changed over the years? Do you find inspiration from other sources compared to earlier in your career?
Absolutely, yes. There is a lot more material out there than there was. I mean, there was always great looking video game characters, but I think now that the hardware's reached such a pinnacle, it's you can be so ambitious with your game, and so that means your characters can be so more ambitious, so much more detailed, and so the stuff that you would have wanted to do years ago, you could never have done because things were so much more basic. But now there isn't really any limit to what you can do. It all comes down to your imagination. And I would never class myself as the best artist in the world, but I would always say that I've had enough experience to have worked in a lot of different areas to know perhaps what people want to see. And at Playtonic, for instance, we've got a lot of people that are very specialized in certain areas, and so I may come up with something and I may build it because I've got experience, but as I mentioned, that would then be handed over to the animator that really knows how to make it move. Or perhaps we've got a concept artist that is better at designing a certain kind of thing than I would be, and so we'll earmark different people for different tasks. And so yeah, it's quite enjoyable, but as I say, you know your strengths and you develop those strengths, and so I know what kind of character I'm comfortable creating, and I know what kind of character that is I would leave to somebody else. But it never stops me trying. But I think you should try a little bit of everything, of course, but there's always going to be something that you find easier, and usually that's the thing that you're best at. So this is why I always draw toads and frogs and lizards.
Great. Fossey, once again, asks, what part of the process of creating characters in the modern space do you enjoy the most? Is it concept art? Is it 3D modeling? Or is it anything else?
I enjoy aspects of it in weird ways, because I used to just love to draw it and just not worry about having to build the model. But now that modeling is less limited, you can build a model easier because you're not forced to try and create a leg out of 20 triangles anymore. You can now make a leg that looks as you imagined it on your concept art. I also found creating the texture maps quite therapeutic. It's almost like creating a puzzle, but there are plenty of tools now which do a lot of the jobs which were time consuming automatically. And so again, the tools have got so much easier that you can now focus on the creative side of it a lot more. And because you're specializing perhaps in only modeling or only concept art, you can get a lot better at that particular discipline. But at Playtonic, I say I'm very lucky because I still get to do a bit of concept art, a bit of modeling, and then a bit of test animation. So it's a great place to work because of that. Because we're not a huge company, we still need our developers to be able to do perhaps more than one thing. But it's good to know different disciplines. But it also, I think, eventually you'll become more specialized and focused on one area. And it's hard to pick an area which I really enjoy. I think I enjoy all of them because I've had a little bit of a taste of every discipline. I don't like fixing bugs. Every time that something goes in, there'll always be a bug, and that's the hard part, finding out why your model's not working correctly or why it's causing a problem with the game. And I think the most problems I ever have isn't so much with creating a model, drawing a model, or putting a skeleton into a model. It's actually not ruining everybody else's work when I put my stuff into this big database, and then you suddenly find out that the level isn't working because Kevin's graphics are core problem. That's the bit I don't like, but it's all part of the learning process. So.
Okay. The next question is from Metaxa14.
Okay.
He or she asks, or the beverage asks, was there a particular game that made you want to get into designing games? And what were the early games you liked the most?
Okay, that's a very good question. And this is a guy called Jamie, I think. I think I know this guy. Yes, I think one of the first games I ever played, which made me want to create video games, was an arcade game called Double Dragon. And as I said, I was a big martial arts fan when I was in my early teens. And I can remember going to the arcade and seeing the attention to detail that was put into this video game when the characters were interacting with each other. And I just really, really wanted to make a game like that. And it also, I think at that point, the games, in particular Capcom's games, had a great cartoon style to them, a great identity, and so they didn't look like video games used to look like when I was playing them at home. They now look like you were operating a cartoon and you were interacting with it. So I'd say I always wanted to work on a game like Double Dragon, and so that's why I was really pleased when I was working on the Battletoads coin-op game, because it's a very similar kind of style game, I think, but with a more cartoony look.
And we got another question by Fox Burrito.
Okay.
How did you decide when a piece of art of any kind is done and ready to be shown to the world? He or she often finds him or herself iterating and iterating, and thus he or she never really finishes anything.
Well, Fox Burrito produced this. And I don't know if you can see, it's very clear, but they came up to myself and Dave Doak when I was at the Retro Messer show about a month ago, and they produced some amazing artwork. So I don't think they've really got a problem in knowing when something's finished, because they're producing such great looking stuff anyway. But you'll always pick at it and you'll always think that it can be better. But I think that changes once you're in a design process and you're actually making a game with a team, because you have a deadline and also people will be waiting for your work, and so there always is a cut-off point. I think there's a danger when you're working alone or when you're working on a project which doesn't have a deadline to just go on forever and ever trying to create something that looks perfect, and you will always find a way that you can make it look better. So you just have to learn, and I think that comes with being involved with the team when you have to stop, because I'm messing with a character forever and somebody else might look at it and say, well, it looks done to me. So it's a difficult thing to do, but you'll learn once you're working on a team with other people, I think.
Before I read the next question, I would like to tell the chat that all your nicknames are very imaginative, and I love every single one of them. Speaking of, President Baby Horse asks, would you say in old games you were emotionally more connected on the designs than now?
With the older games, the 8-bit games and the 16-bit games, is that what you mean? I think. Yeah, I think in a way, so for instance, with the Battletoads, we designed the whole set of characters, created a style guide, and then the characters developed. And it didn't take as long to produce the graphics because the machine was way more limited, but you did feel that was a part of you. Whereas now you are specialized with perhaps 2 or 3 characters, maybe 4 characters in a game, and maybe another part of the game. So you're perhaps not connected to the whole thing as you would have been years ago. You're now a part of a team. You're a part of a machine, a very lovely machine that makes a video game, but you'll make that character your baby, and you'll see that character come on. And when everybody's got that attitude and they're working together on a team and they all really love that, and that piece of whatever it is they're building, you see it all come together, and it amazes you when you look at it. Your character walk past that amazing aeroplane that somebody's modeled or whatever, and it all comes together. You can't do it all on your own, not a big project, so it's just the trade-off. I think years ago, or if you were working on a small project, maybe now if you're a small indie team, it's probably a little bit more emotionally involving because you're overseeing the whole thing. But at the end of the day, you end up with a great looking game, and it's just nice to have been part of that whole development process. And it's just the way it is. As teams get bigger, you end up focusing on a smaller area. But I'd say I'm just as emotionally involved now. It's just I'm not involved with the big picture. I'm involved with the characters, or maybe an element of design rather than the whole thing.
Thank you for your answer. The next question is again by Frauke K, asking, this is more of a animation question. When doing cutscenes, would you recommend to animate each cutscene individually, or can you get away with like doing 5 generic animations and chaining them?
I guess it depends on how well you've storyboarded your idea. The main thing that I think, if you look at a huge production company like Pixar, before they actually go about making that cartoon, they need to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because it's not like a video game. It's not interactive. The score has to work in with the dialogue and everything. The camera has to tell the story, so it has to be designed again. And you can do it in whatever way you want, really, whatever works best for you. But the important thing is to just have a plan. And if it flows together on your plan, on your storyboard, then it doesn't really matter how you put it together, as long as everybody that you're working with knows how it's put together. If you're doing it for yourself and it's your own project, then just do what's best for yourself. But always make sure you've got the plan and something to stick to, because the worst thing to do if you don't is you can start making it up as you go along, and then you end up with this never-ending process of going off on a tangent and making something entirely different to what you originally set out to do. And if you're going to work at a company, that costs money, because the time that's involved in creating those sequences is going to be another day of pay every time. So you have to plan your work, I think, and then it doesn't really matter. As long as we do things at Playtonic, for instance, with the modeling, a lot of the artists will perhaps model in a slightly different way, but the end result is always usable. And likewise with animation, if you're comfortable doing it one way and somebody else would do it another way, providing you reach the end goal and it's usable, it doesn't really matter, whatever works for you.
Another question by Spielverstand. Sorry again that I haven't noticed your question. What sources do you recommend for learning about game design? Any good books that one should read?
For game design, in general, I couldn't really advise you other than say to look at perhaps get on that Unity forum and look how games are being made, and then I think once you've picked up the basic structure and workflow of creating even a basic game, you can sort of work from there, and then you can put things together by accident and create a game. I think it's good to have a play around with that if you haven't already done so. But when it comes down to literature and what to read, I wouldn't really know, because it depends on whether you mean for graphics and characters or whether you mean game design in general. So if you just mean about art in general, the best thing I always think to look at is just take a look on Pinterest, and you'll see thousands and thousands of artists on there that are producing amazing looking work, and that will help influence you sometimes, I think.
Okay. Another question by Metaxa14. Is it better doing something like Donkey Kong games for someone else, or working on your own things like Salamandos?
Good question. When I was working on what was RC Pro-Am, I was really excited about Timber the tiger, which was going to be the main character in the game. And I think when I worked on Dinosaur Planet, which became Star Fox Adventures, again, we put Timber the tiger as the main character. And on both of those games, at the last minute on Diddy Kong Racing, Nintendo looked at it and said, this is great, but we'd rather have an IP that people are familiar with, because nobody knows who Timber the Tiger is. He can remain in the game, but it'll go a lot further if it's called Diddy Kong Racing. Fortunately, I designed Diddy Kong as well, so it was kind of something which I was emotionally involved anyway, because Diddy Kong was still a character I designed. But when he came into the game and the title changed, it was actually a way better game, and everything sort of locked into place, and it became Diddy Kong Racing. And I couldn't imagine RC Pro-Am 64 now. And the same with Star Fox Adventures. Once that moved from Dinosaur Planet to Star Fox Adventures, once we got Fox there as the main character, it made creating the story and creating the environment a lot easier, because we already had a brief to go on with the Star Fox universe. And so I think those two examples created a better game. But for sure, it's very exciting working on your own IP. And again, as I mentioned, the Salamandos thing, at the moment, that is an idea and a concept, not a video game at the moment. And I can imagine if it was made into a video game, it would be a great fighting game or something like that. But I wouldn't ever want to lose control of it now, because although I love working on something which is tried and tested, and you've got Donkey Kong, and I'd love to work on a Donkey Kong game or a Killer Instinct game again, it's nice to have something which is your baby, of course. And so the Salamandos characters are my kind of fun side project at the moment. But who knows, maybe at some point we'll write a game with that, and then Star Fox or Diddy Kong will jump in and it'll become something entirely different. So, going with the track record, that's probably what will happen.
Great. So it seems like, as far as I can see, we answered every single question so far. I would like to use this moment for a short plug. If you're fascinated with Kevin's career and with Kevin as a person, and you've even seen our David Wise masterclass, good news, if you're in Germany or around Germany, or you're willing to travel to Germany, you will be able to meet both, because we are doing a small tour in November. And I'm going to post the link right now with our tour dates. We will start at the Stuttgart Comic Con from the 26th through the 27th of November in, obviously, Stuttgart. On the 28th, which is a Monday, we will be at the Black Screen Records store in Cologne, where Dave and Kevin will be signing everything you would love to have signed. On the same day, once again, the lovely people from the Stadtbücherei Düsseldorf invited us to a lovely talk, which you will also be able to see live in person, but also on YouTube. So if you're interested in, you can see us there. And on the next day, on the 29th of November, we will be back in Stuttgart at the Verleinix Games and More video game store, where we'll also be doing a live signing. So if you're interested in meeting the guys, head on over. Photographs, autographs, everything is for free, and it would be lovely to have you there. If not, don't worry about it. And yeah, you can, of course, see Kevin every other day or not, depending on his time schedule, on his Twitch channel. That I will link in a second. I already plugged the DK Creations YouTube channel as well. It's a fantastic channel to get into video game design. And yeah, my name is Daniel Vetter once again. If you want to follow me and my shenanigans, my Twitch is non-existent because I don't stream, but I have Twitter. And you can see a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff with David and Kevin in the upcoming future. We have a lot of great stuff in the works. We'll see you very, very soon, I hope, in different countries. Question, when can we expect you back to Norway? I'm pretty sure Kevin and Dave will be very soon in Norway because they love it there and they love Jan in the Retrospielmessen. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be pretty soon. That's nothing that I confirmed. I'm just pretty sure there will be something.
Hopefully before too long. So not before too long.
And once again, when will you be back in Norway? I'm pretty sure pretty soon. Right, and the Stadtbücherei Düsseldorf is now posting the other 2 masterclasses that we had with Tom Du Bois, who is a very fantastic graphic designer as well. He did a ton of different artworks for Konami video games. If you ever played Turtles in Time, for example, he did that artwork. And well, I think David Wise needs no introduction. Fantastic composer who worked and still works with Kevin. And yeah, I think the last word is with the Stadtbücherei Düsseldorf and with Dirk. And I'm gonna say goodbye. Thank you very, very much for your time. Wish you all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Can I say thank you for everybody that's taken part and watched and contributed to the chat, and also big thanks to Daniel for putting this together with Dirk, and has done a great job. We had a few technical issues. I'm not quite sure what caused them. It wasn't me. We don't know what happened, but something happened, but it's usually me, but this time it wasn't. So
this time
I think
it was
the guys have done a great job of putting it together, so I'd like to give them a round of applause myself. So
yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I just say thank you for joining us tonight, sticking with us. I'm sorry for the problems we had tonight. It wasn't Kevin's fault, it was all mine. So have a good one. Bye-bye.